Welcome, everybody, to this session, the first session of our seminar today. I'm really pleased to have the chance to introduce Dr. Silvia Pellicer-Ortín today. The first thing that I would like to say about her is that she's a very enthusiastic academic, and she is. I've known her now for a while, and she has an outstanding academic career, and she's a wonderful teacher. All our students are really happy to have her as a teacher in our master's degree. So thank you so much, Silvia, for being with us today. It's a pleasure and an honor. Silvia is lecturer at the Department of English and German Philology at the Faculty of Education at the University of Zaragoza. And as I said, her academic career is quite preeminent already, and it's going to be in the future, I'm sure. Silvia has collaborated with many universities as academic visitor, for example, at the University of Edinburgh, the University of Cambridge, University of Reading, and Verbeek College at the University of London. Amongst her many awards, she has been offered a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship or the prestigious Bergen Scholarship Award by the Academy of Europe. Silvia's main research interests lie in contemporary British fiction and autobiography, with a special focus on British Jewish female literature, the ethical and traumatic component in the writings of sexual and ethnic minorities, the Holocaust, and the question of Jewishness, feminism, women and gender studies, on which she has published extensively. She's also very interested and involved in questions concerning pedagogy and innovative teaching methods in higher education, mainly in the field of foreign languages. She has participated in a quite large number of national and international conferences, and she has been invited to teach research seminars at the university cities, for example, such as Cambridge University, Northampton, and Birmingham. Some of her previous projects comprehend a special issue of the MLA peer-reviewed British journal Critical Engagements on the writer Eva Figes, and a compilation of essays called, as you can see here, Trauma Narratives and Her Story, with Palgrave Macmillan. Last year she published a monograph, also here, entitled Eva Figes' Writers, A Journey Through Trauma. And she's now co-editing a collection of called, it's going to be called, I think, Memory Frictions in Contemporary Narratives in English, together with Dr. Maria Jesus Martinez Alfaro, and it's going to be published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2017. So I really think that for all these reasons, we are all in for a treat today. I'm sure you agree with me. And her paper today is going to be, has a very appealing title. It's A Journey Through Art, Transnational and Transitional Women in the Globalized World, and I think it's a perfect title and a perfect tool for our master's degree, where literature and social issues are all interconnected. So please join me in welcoming today Silvia Pellicer. Thank you so much, Silvia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marta, for this nice presentation. I'm so happy to be here, and I must start saying that it's a pleasure for me to be here today participating in this third seminar. I also think that the talk I will be giving today fits very well in a master like this, and mainly in the aspect of the Proyección social. And in this master, I teach one of the optional subjects, literature and history. This is a subject where we address the theoretical context of the postmodernist and post-structuralist movements of the 70s and the 80s, by focusing on the historiographic turn brought to the fore by new historicism, which dismantled, as we know, the formerly established grand narratives and the macro stories in order to give voice to new versions of history. So this is what we do in the subject, and I think in my talk today, perhaps some of the questions that arise in this course will re-emerge also in my talk, as local and minority stories, those written by women, will be heard against the framework of globalization and migration. So I must say that my involvement in this area comes from various sources. At the academic level, my main field of research lies on contemporary literature, as Marta has explained, the literature written by women and mainly migrant women, as is the case of many contemporary US women writers, on which I've been focusing my research in the last few years. But also at the personal level, as a woman working in academia who believes in the necessity of ongoing dialogue on the role of women in the current transnational, transcultural, transmigratory, transatlantic, and even transmemorial world we are currently living. I will begin by making allusion to the increasing powerful conception of the world as an integrated global place. The decline of national sovereignty characterized the turn of the century, and it has become very difficult to imagine our environments without making reference to the global context. In other words, as Roland Robertson has suggested, globalization can be defined, I quote, as the intensification of a consciousness of the world as a whole, end quote. From this, Ateljevic also argues that a new global consciousness is awakening, or has already awakened, we can say, and fundamental changes are to occur. And other scholars, like Friedman, have identified a shift from nation-based paradigms to transnational models, emphasizing the global space of ongoing travel and transcontinental connection. In keeping with this, Spanish philosopher Rosa Maria Rodríguez Magda has contended that the constant presence of flags and connectivity in our present information society fosters an emerging process of totality that, rather than hierarchical or pyramidal, follows a network-like model, devoid of clear organization or any hegemonic data. And this is the interconnected and stable social reality that begs for a similarly fluid trans-border mode of thinking, capable of responding to the demands made by an era of swift transformations. Yet an opposite tendency seems to have developed. This is the process of globalization just mentioned, but in parallel we can also see an increasing number of political, cultural, and ideological movements demanding the locality and singularity of their particular context, looking for local versions of history, local interpretations of the unstable reality to which local groups can attach themselves, to find some sense of belonging, even though this may be illusory. I would like to link this process of globalization to the way they affect individual and collective identity and memory formation processes. In his seminal book, Multidirectional Memory, the critic Michael Rothberg developed the concept of multidirectional memory, suggesting, I quote, that we consider memory as multidirectional, as subject to ongoing negotiation, cross-referencing, and borrowing, as productive and not privative, end quote. On the same vein, Max Silverman, more recently, has claimed the concept of palimpsestic memory as a ceaseless process of straddling and superimposition of elements, where memory traces overlap, intersect, and are transformed, pointing out the way in which in our global world, where clear spatial and identity boundaries seem to be increasingly blurred, very diverse memories regarding complex episodes of migration or even trauma can be regarded as interrelated, and mainly when they have caused unfair suffering to minority social groups. Thus, this comparative perspective supports the idea that all forms of marginalization, exclusion, or abuse are the final manifestation of the process of identity formation that promotes the idea of otherness, which is artificially constructed in the public sphere, defining the social attitudes, the policies, and the ideologies that sustain our societies. Thus, we can say that this contemporary phenomenon of the specialization of memory and identity would emerge from all these ideas. As Radstone has put it, the attention to cultural memory as process has involved, quote, the spatial tracking of memory as a significant aspect of what has suggestively been termed memory on the move, end quote. And focusing on the intrinsic relationship between the formation of memories and place, Schramm claims that, quote, the process of identification of memory with place implies the complex entanglement of procedures of remembering, forgetting, and the production of counter-memories, end quote. Then the idea of traveling memories seemed thus to come to the fore, These have been defined by Rutstone again as a shift in memory studies from research on sites of memory to the analysis of memory's cultural dynamics. This has brought into view its inter- and transmedial connections. We can say that in the era of exile, migration, diaspora, and dislocation, memories have proved to be mobile, to travel across space and time, demonstrating that a transcultural view of memory may offer new insights to understand current dynamics of globalization and transculturality. This cross and transcultural movement of memories can be particularly observed in the case of immigrant communities. Castles and Miller have defined our time as the age of migration, characterized by the blurring of traditional national boundaries and the effects of globalization. Then, considering all these ideas, we could ask ourselves, what does art have to do with all this? Okay, so this is my second part of my talk, to try to make the link with this. I would say then that new identities have emerged out of this exchange and relationality, and they have demanded new forms of cultural, artistic, and literary representations. In this sense, it might be argued that art in general and literature, in my particular field of study, have become the place where many of these multidimensional identities are negotiated. This has been mainly the case for those identities that had conventionally been defined as liminal or diasporic, since it has just been agreed that the most recent theories of memory see it as a multifarious site of clash, controversy, contradiction, and questioning, giving way to numerous frictions that can be unveiled, addressed, and perhaps reconciled through artistic and literary practices. In fact, we can say that those minority groups that had been previously excluded from hegemonic historical discourses on the grounds of class, gender, race, religion, have attempted to reconstruct their fragmented memories and silenced stories. Their counter-histories characteristically defy long-established totalitarian versions of history, making good the contention within the current fields of trauma and memory studies that art has a crucial role in the representation and even abreaction of troubled individual and collective experiences. In the case of literature, the unprecedented visibility of social, ethnic, religious, and/or sexual minorities in present-day narratives in English begs for the consideration of a phenomenon whose origins go back to the change of worldview that took place in the Western world in the late 60s and 70s. This change brought about a number of sociocultural and political changes, running from the passing of laws aimed at protecting these minorities against the dominant discourse, to the redress of balance in the traditional definition of self and other. This is a process that has reached its climax in the 21st century, the moment when more and more thinkers have been aware of the ethical need to deconstruct the West and non-West binary that is at the root of Eurocentric thinking, trying thus to transcend the dominant Eurocentric perspective on such central issues of our present age as the status of labor under globalization, the relation between the first and the third worlds after the colonization processes, or the impact of climate change. When talking about previously unrepresented or silenced groups throughout history, women come to the fore, as they have found it difficult to voice their versions of history in the public sphere for centuries, as well as they have seen how the notion of womanhood had traditionally been designed by others. Now that the various waves of feminism have gone by, it can be generally accepted that sexuality and gender are social constructs, and that the relationship between men and women has conventionally been embedded in power structures, turning gender into a socio-cultural creation, constructed on biological, economic, and cultural grounds. This is even more so for the numerous groups of immigrant women that have been led to feel as alien others at a variety of levels, as others within the new languages, cultures, and histories that they have needed to assimilate and incorporate into their own, and as others within traditional patriarchal structures that had oppressed and subjugated them. Following Castles and Miller again, one of the main features of this age of migration is said to be the feminization of migration. This is a phenomenon that deserves further study, since as exposed on the Open Democracy website, I quote, studying transnationalism, meaning that migrants are seen as representatives of a more globalized world, also asks for a gendered approach to the subject, since women and men experience immigration and citizenship in different ways. The effects and contradictions of gender diaspora is an under-examined topic within migration literature. One issue, for example, is that the conditions for moving transnationally are not always available to women. End quote. It is within this context that the prefix trans can also bring some light into. Although it could be argued that the idea of transnational, transatlantic, transmodern, transcultural has become a fashionable concept and even a kind of cliché within the field of the humanities, I would like to argue, following Gilmore and Marshall, that transnational engagements of womanhood have been really powerful to foster larger claims for justice and human rights and provide feminine critiques of race and gender. By 2005, when Alexander's Pedagogies of Crossing came out, she explicitly called the field she was working in transnational, coining the ideology of transnational feminism, which has been thought to evoke international gatherings, anti-imperial and decolonial thought, and post-colonial studies, especially through Gayatri Spivak, among others. Drawing on the recent ideas exposed by Blackwell, Briggs, and Tew in 2015, the Transnational also names an emergent post-1965 immigration reform axis of difference, which attempted to center new immigrants and the new forms and rhythms of globalization and its resistance. There are other contributors to this movement too. To cite some of them, Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands epistemology has been really groundbreaking by arguing for the literal Southwest and the metaphorical in-betweenness of Chicana's identities, and neither here nor there, US nor Mexico. Just as other Chicana feminist theorists have named the liminal third space of politics, spirituality, and nationality. Within the field of women's studies, the transnational can function as an analytic that helps to see how processes like migration or environmental degradation cross international borders. Thus, the trans here in transnational articulates a different relationships to the nation than comparative on international analysis, which recenters the nation as the unit of comparison of similar phenomena that are happening at a global scale, yet whose effects will vary depending on the local particularities of each context. Again, going back to this idea of locality. For many of these transnational, these transitional women, we can say that artistic manifestations have become fruitful sites, quote, to give expression to the voiceless or to that which could not make itself heard before, end quote, according to Emily Sun. In this sense, some disciplines, such as the fields of trauma or memory studies, have worked from the premise that diverse forms of narrative or acts of storytelling can contribute to the negotiation of complex identities and even the healing of traumatized individuals or groups. Basic psychoanalytical concepts like Freud's talking cure or Janet's and Jung's certainty that the healing of individuals and communities begins when they are able to transform traumatic events into a coherent narrative are traditional examples of this view, that the main step for the assimilation of painful events is, as those that many of these women have encountered in their journeys across the globe, is to narrativize these experiences. For instance, more contemporary critics have coined notions like that of scriptotherapy by Suzette Henke. She names this process as that of writing out and writing through traumatic experience in the mode of therapeutic reenactment, in this case highlighting the therapeutic power of writing. All these critics from the past and the present support the idea that narrative in any of its forms, whether it's literary, filmic, photographic, autobiographical, may offer a unique space to verbalize, negotiate, and sometimes even heal conflicting memories at a variety of levels. For the individual artist behind these narratives, for the collectives and minor groups the narrations stand for, and for the readers or viewers who enter an empathic relationship with this text. This allows them to see the pain of others, to be implicated in the experiences of foreignness of other alien subjects. This way, artistic practices may force the audiences to look at the face of diasporic characters, of transnational images, of dystopian spaces, of multidirectional memories, extracting from them ethical lessons that can be extrapolated to the social realities outside the cultural artifact. Artistic practices succeed then in offering the sites where contradictory, liminal, and even painful events conforming the identity of the female modern transitional subject may be updated, unveiled, and exposed in their sheer otherness, forcing the audience to leave the comfort zone and see experiences of displacement through those others' eyes. I will provide now some examples for us to see how art can be an empowering tool used by contemporary women on the move to reconcile their fragmented selves, find a place in the different societies where they have settled, subvert recurrent stereotypes, and try to define their feminine selves, both in local and global interrelated systems. For reasons of time, I will only provide some examples, but I hope they may be useful for you to perhaps continue doing your own inquiry in this cultural production of these many women. Regarding the field of literature and focusing on fiction, there is a vast plethora of narratives depicting the difficult experiences that lie behind the diasporic movements undergone by women in the last few decades. I will mention only some of them. We could analyze Cuban and American transitions, as can be seen in Cristina Garcia's Dreaming in Cuban and Loida Martiza Perez's Geographies of Home. Asian-American relations in Maxine Hong Kingston's The Woman Warrior. Jen's Mona and the Promised Land, or Amy Tan's Bonesetter's Daughter. African-American stories of generational oppression, like in Alice Walker, The Color Purple, Toni Morrison's Beloved, and more recently, Phyllis Alessia Perry's A Sunday in June, and Aminata Sforna's The Memory of Love. The British Caribbean legacy, as happens in Sadie Smith's White Teeth, or Shani Mutu's Sirius Blooms at Night. The Canadian sense of identity and the relation with the States and the rest of the world in many of the works by Alice Munro and Margaret Atwood. The conflictive past of Native American cultures, as we can see in Louis Sedry's The Round House. British Indian legacies, as in Mina's Alexander's Nampally Road and Anita Desai's Baumgartner's Bombay. And we could continue with these hyphenated identities for a long time, showing the multiple ways in which previous ideas of nation and identity have been challenged by migration and mobility. In very general terms, most of these narratives I have mentioned share a common use of spatial metaphors of dislocation, images of hybridity symbolizing the experiences of in-betweenness undergone by the protagonist, spiritual and physical journeys to their homelands, personal quests for independence and liberation. And in most of them, it is the act of writing that enables the oppressed characters represented, not only because of their sex, but also due to their race and social class, to regain a more stable sense of identity, or at least problematize it, and become active subjects in the public sphere. I've chosen a couple of examples that are quite popular, quite well known for us. One is Beloved, published by Nobel Prize winner Toni Morrison in 1987, in an attempt to rewrite the traumatic history of a whole generation of black slave women, a history which shows the contradictory urges both to transmit and silence the painful memories of these women's past. In this novel, she textualizes the body of the main character, Seth, so as to represent the collectively damaged identity of many black women under diaspora, slavery, and abuse across time. Seth's body, full of scars, as you may see on the screen, symbolizes the heart identity of many other women on the move, like her and other characters in the novel, who are happened to be defined by their scars, symbolizing their horrible past. However, as you may see on the image and in the following quotation, I will read it. And when the top of her dress was around her hips, and he saw what the sculpture on her back had become, like the decorative work of an ironsmith, too passionate for display, he could think but not say, "Oh Lord, girl." We can say that, as you may see, and despite this following quotation, these scars, simulating the shape of a tree, sublimate a site of trauma and pain into one of beauty and growth, highlighting the possibility of healing across generations. Another good instance comes from the more contemporary Anglo-Caribbean writer Sadie Smith, White Teeth, set against the assumed multicultural background of contemporary London and showing several generations connected across time. This novel deconstructs the ideas of race, nation, assimilation, destiny, and even religious fundamentalism in an attempt to voice the difficulties that hybrid subjects encounter in reactionary societies like the British one. Critical thoughts that are recurrently voiced by the different characters present in the narrative. I've selected 2 quotations from there. These days, it feels to me like you make a devil's pact when you walk into this country. You hand over your passport at the check-in. You get stamped, you want to make a little money, get yourself started, but you mean to go back. Who would want to stay? Cold, wet, miserable, terrible food, dreadful newspapers. Who would want to stay in a place where you are never welcomed, only tolerated, just tolerated, like you're an animal finally house-trained, end quote. Or as you may see in the second example, no fiction, no myths, no lies, no tangled webs. This is how Eerie imagined her homeland, because homeland is one of the magical fantasy worlds, like unicorn and soul and infinity, that have now passed into language. Here we can observe how the ideas of belonging and homeland are radically destroyed as idealistic utopias in favor of the crude reality of hostile lands, where hybrid and alien women find it very hard to accommodate their diasporic selves. Moving now on to autobiographical practices, the last decades have witnessed the proliferation of life writing in its different manifestations. The formal distinctions between fiction, autobiography, and testimonial literature, together with the role of the writer in this kind of narrations, has created many dilemmas for critics like us. Mainly if we consider the recent explosion of new autobiographical genres, which has given way to various testimonial subgenres, such as autobiography, literary biography, autofiction, autobiographic fiction, limit case autobiographies. It's also been agreed that most of these latest autobiographical genres deal with problematic aspects concerning the narrativization of difficult life experiences related to traumatic episodes, war, genocide, abuse, or migration. These contradictions have given way to new features that characterize these new liminal genres, like the predominance of individual versions of history, the fusion of literary and non-literary genres, the construction of embedded narratives, the presence of various testimonial dimensions, or the use of self and meta-reflexive comments on trauma. Some relevant examples of these limit case autobiographies are found in the group of contemporary Jewish women writers who have lately published a vast amount of semi-autobiographical works to reconcile themselves with their ancestors' land, as well as with their adoptive homes, to put together the fragmented pieces of their family identities, and to come to terms to what it means to be a migrant Jewish woman in today's world. For instance, in the War After, Living with the Holocaust, Anne Karff, who we had the honor to meet last week in the IDEAN conference, she mixes testimonial, autobiographical, historical elements, along with interviews, letters, journalistic reports, and trauma theory. Her autobiography acts as the narrative device to explore her parents' past as Holocaust survivors, the collective history of the Second World War and the Nazi regime, the traumatic process of transgenerational transmission of trauma inherited by many subsequent generations of Holocaust survivors, like Karff herself, as well as the personal story recounting her journey to the family homeland in Poland. This example comes now from literary criticism and a critic, musician, and writer, Micheline Wonder, of British Jewish origin too. As in one of her literary essays, she explains her marginal relationship, and by extension that of other migrant Jewish women writers like herself. So this marginal relationship with the center, and how language, English in this case, has played a crucial role in giving expression to her identity, as well as in redefining the boundaries between the center and the margins. I mean, the use of English as a non-native language for many of these writers usually has double-sided implications, being on the one hand a foreign language alienating these subjects' original selves, but on the other providing them with the tools to communicate and make the message be known to the world, and offering them the opportunity to move from the margins to the center. I'm quoting her. The center for each of us is our dominant language and the culture to which it belongs. The edges from which, in my case, I relate to them are those of woman, feminist, socialist, playwright, poet, novelist, and a host of others. These are not merely fragmentations, but segmented sources of both my histories and my literary, aesthetic, political interest. And all these coalesce around this main expressive language of English. The languages in which all these intricate questions are discussed define new centers, new edges, new items. Then moving now onto film and documentaries, the situation is similar to the one concerning literature. In the fictional film, we can remember many recent films which represent directly or indirectly the greatest migratory movements witnessed by the 20th century from female perspectives, mainly those caused by the Second World War and afterwards. Various examples from different decades and addressing different immigrants' conflicts could be the following ones. Barbara Streisand's Gentle is an American romantic musical drama based on the play of the same name. In this, we can say the combination is a musical which incorporates humor and music to relate the adventures of a Jewish girl in Poland who decides to dress and live like a man so that she can receive an education in Talmudic law after her father dies. Eva Gardós, an American Rhapsody from 2001, depicts a young Hungarian girl struggling to find her place in the world when reunited with her parents in the States, years after she was left behind during the difficulties throughout communism in the 50s. Two more examples could be Yamina Ben-Gwiwi's Sunday, God Willing, again from 2001. It revolves around the life of an Algerian immigrant woman in France, describing her family's experience moving to France and the struggles for autonomy that Algerian women still continue to face today. Or Sarah Graven's Brick Lane in 2017, based on Monica Ali's bestseller, Brick Lane, narrating the misfortunes of a Bangladeshi woman in London in the 80s. So these were mainly fictional forms through the visual arts. Other examples can be seen in documentary film, and I will show you now an example. In 2015, there was a very interesting initiative launched by the New York Women and Film and Television Organization to produce a screening series for their Cultural Immigrant Initiative, Immigrant Women Sharing Our Voice Through Film. The main objective was to promote New York City immigrant stories made by women filmmakers. Some of the selected films were Judith Portrait of a Street Vendor, directed by Zahida Pirani, Claiming Our Voice, directed by Jennifer Samuel, or Living Quechua, directed by Christine Mladic Jenny. For instance, Judith's Portrait of the Street Vendor reports the journey into the daily life of Judith, a street vendor from Guatemala, who lives and works in New York. There, she exposes her daily struggles in the city's streets and her hopes as an immigrant worker, mother, activist, and community organizer. I will show you now a short clip from this documentary.
Nosotros tenemos poder, pero tenemos que unirnos. Por eso es que yo trabajo duro para que ella pueda ir a la universidad.
Puede llegar a un arresto, nos pueden arrestar y después llevarnos a migración.
This was the trailer of the documentary, and now with the situation in the States, let's see what happens with these initiatives. No? So they are more urgent even now. Another example also comes from the States. It's a series of documentaries entitled Immigration, A Place Called Home, produced by Women Make Movies. Again, it's produced by women. This features titles that celebrate the lives of immigrants in the US and explore, again, ongoing struggles of immigrants today. Again, the films go from Cuban immigrants' experiences, Asian, Pacific and American women, Puerto Rican and Korean American women, among many others. This time making use of images, interviews, documentaries to provide answers to what it means to be a transnational woman. All the links are in the presentation, so you can check afterwards if you want to. Yet I would like to pay attention to a group that is being particularly productive in the creation of visual text, where their conflicting relationships with the ideas of frontiers or boundaries are exposed. This is the case of the Chicanas filmmakers. Being a great example, the work carried out by Linda Garcia Merchant in the positively acclaimed work Las Mujeres de la Caucus Chicana in 2007. Which, emerging from the feminist and Chicano movements of the 60s and 70s, tells the story of 6 Latinas who founded the National Women's Political Caucus, representing Latina sisters across the nation and working towards liberation. I will show you only a couple of minutes from Linda Garcia Merchant's view on the documentary.
Let me tell you the experience of the United Nations International Women's Year Conference. The mujeres from La Raza Unida, we found ourselves, instead of attending the United Nations where the United States and Europe and all were, we found ourselves attending the sessions and the conferences and the group that was really organized to really deal with global and social equality.
I don't think I've ever been anything other than a feminist. I think if you're a woman, you're a feminist, and if you say you're not a feminist, you're fooling yourself. Because I think if you're a human being and you're born, you know, with different organs, you still want to realize that one thing, and that is to be fully alive, to be fully complete, to be fully liberated, you know. And why would you want anything else?
I marched. I exposed a middle-class Mexican in the floor-length fur coat, working on doing television, and walking down LaSalle Street with these women that came from the suburbs to march for more.
So it's a bit long, but you can have an idea. No? It's different interviews of the women, no? That created this movement. Very interesting. Then we move, and also graphic novels have also become the site where women represent and give voice to their hybrid identities, as Sarah Lightman has demonstrated in her analysis of Jewish women representations in comic film. In her work, Graphic Details, Confessional Comics by Jewish Women, which has received several awards, she offers an insight into the creation of autobiographical comics that resonate beyond self, gender, and ethnicity. Intimate, often awkward, details fill the lives of 18 Jewish women artists who bear all their identity tensions as Jewish women, descendants of immigrants, or survivors in their work. And another great example could be that of Willow Wilson and Adrienne Alphona, Miss Marvel, No Normal, in 2014, where the protagonist Kamala, a second-generation Pakistani immigrant grown up in the States, acquires supernatural powers. Thus, Kamala is given a power that the media do not usually offer to anyone from a Muslim background. She saves people while wearing patriotic American colors, and then she has the power to change people's ideas about Islam and Pakistani culture. Finally, Other visual arts also offer examples of the way women are using imagination to reinvent themselves and trespassing frontiers and boundaries and trying to connect themselves despite the local peculiarities of their context. To cite some interesting examples, the photographical exhibition Miradas de Iberoamérica focused on the issue of gender and immigration to promote the need to defend human rights and equality among South American female immigrants in our country, in Spain. The winner, Lena Mucha, is a German woman, but she embodies the transnational feminist idea that women can connect across cultures and across the globe in depicting and denouncing their difficult experiences. She's German, but in her photograph, this is the one you can see now, Rosalba, she was able to capture and give voice to South American women, who perhaps could not have found a space of her own to become visible if it had not been because of this European photographer and not a woman on the move. Another relevant initiative took place in Barcelona in 2015, organized by the United Nations University Institute on Globalization, Culture and Mobility, under the name Women of the World Photo Exhibition, featuring photographs and oral stories of 16 immigrant women living and working in Barcelona. By focusing on immigrant women of diverse ethnicities, ages, social classes, educational levels, and professional backgrounds, it explored the contrast between home, work, and the city for first-generation female immigrants. You can see some of the pictures there. Moreover, another relevant project in this sense could be the one carried out by the association Migrantas, a visual language of migration, set up in Berlin. Working with public urban spaces as its platform, Migrantas aims to make visible the feelings of those who have left their country and now live in a new one. As they explain on their website, I quote, "Migrant women and their experiences remain often invisible to the majority of our society. Migrantas works with issues of migration and identity and intercultural dialogue. Their work incorporates tools from the visual arts, graphic design, and social sciences. The resulting drawings are then condensed into pictograms and distributed in public spaces," as you may see some examples here. In conclusion, taking all these ideas into account, I come to the initial question posed at the beginning of my presentation. Is art a liberation tool for these transitional women? Does art provide the path for an identity and memory journey that may help them gain a voice and find a place in their new homes? What are the challenges and opportunities behind the transnational and transitional feminine use of art? I see several challenges that will have to be addressed in our near future, such as being able to develop a general feeling of empathy across the nations for citizens to understand and be open to all these alternative set of origin stories and the complicated ways diverse people are situated or constructed by their nations. Thus, destabilizing one static notion of the nation state or what transnational means for the multiple marginalized women. Moreover, this new way of looking at transnational feminism cannot forget about previous discourses, such as postcolonialism, in order to avoid that global and totalizing forces observe these minorities' stories, but on the contrary, it must be able to show the connections in the lives of peoples on the move, but maintaining the singular and unique value of their stories. And more importantly, attention must be paid to the power relations that in the end give voice to some groups while others continue to be silenced, deconstructing the intricate ideological layers that sustain our Western world. Yet I see many opportunities in the use of art as an empowering site for migrant women in particular and for our local societies in general. On the one hand, just as has been proved that contemporary phenomena like globalization, transnationalism, and migratory movements characterize the 21st century, these multifarious cultural productions unveil that the sexual submission of men, women, and children under extreme economic circumstances is certainly not less than in previous generations and societies, but has mostly shifted out of sight. Thus, art offers us some glasses to see again all these problematic experiences. And on the other hand, this can demonstrate that art should have a more social and political role instead of the abstract and marginal one that has sometimes been assigned to it by the market and capitalized, globalized system. All these ideas could support Silverman's view that art works are more suited than historical or sociological works in making visible the complex interaction of times and sites at play in memory, since an essential characteristic of imaginative works is to, quote, blur the frontiers between the conscious and the unconscious, the present and the past, and the personal and the collective, end quote. However, instead of blur, I would use the verb bridge, as we can agree that art offers a bridge between cultures, times, religions, and languages. A bridge that at this very moment many brave women are just crossing in the hope of a refreshed and invigorated future. Thank you.
Silvia, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I'm really touched right now because, at least to me, you've made me think of so many things that we are in touch with every single day, because this seems to be quite far away. Right now we are in this room all together listening to you, but we know so many people that are in that same situation, migrant women that we know, that they work for us on many occasions, and they are invisible. Nobody knows about their lives. Sometimes we don't know about them that much, and we have to build bridges every single day. And art is a way of building those bridges, and our master's degree is a way to build bridges. So I would ask you so many things, but I think the floor is yours now. I work on aging studies. I know that there's someone else here also working on aging. We've published a book called, because we presented it in IDEAN last week in Westcamp. Thank you so much. I forgot about that, about saying that she's been part of the organizing committee. She's worked with the organizing committee in Huesca last week for the IDEAN conference, which is, as you know, a big conference in Spain every single year. So thank you so much for being here after such a hard week for you. Also, last week in IDEAN, we presented our book, Traces of Aging, where we were talking about so many issues related to your talk about memory, how memory works, also in relation to age. And I think that you have mentioned that issue, aging in migrant women, but I guess that's a pivotal issue too. So I don't know. I'm sure that you also have many other things to comment on. The healing process of narrative is wonderful. The life repair.
Yeah.
How narrative.
To share with the community.
Yeah, how narratives make you share the experiences of some other people, how art opens up new ways of reflection on how other people live. And so there's a huge ethical component in your talk, and I think literature and ethics has to be interrelated, because sometimes we think, why are we doing this? Our work is not doing anything for anyone else, but it is doing a lot, because it's making people reflect on what art means, and you've done a great job here today. So, any comments?
Thank you very much, Silvia. That was great. Listening to you, the emphasis is very much on transnationality as perceived by the subject and often perceived as trauma. But I was wondering whether we should be looking also at transnationality from another perspective, from the perspective of the communities and the societies that receive migrants, and perhaps transnationality perceived as a threat, especially nowadays when we see that is being used, manipulated politically, and we're coming back to these notions of the people, the nation against the others, against migrants. And I was wondering if there is work being done on that front in literary studies. Thank you very much.
Well, you are completely right. I think we have to look at this phenomenon from both perspectives. And, well, the narratives I work with, as you said, mainly work with this moving subject, no, I can say. But also we have some narratives from the people, from the communities that are receiving the immigrants. But I think this is not as popular as the other ones in literary and cultural studies, perhaps. I don't know if perhaps critics, we tend to empathize more with the narratives from the immigrant subjects, or perhaps we think that focusing on them or making them perhaps more popular to the audience, to the people that are receiving immigrants, may contribute to foster more empathy among the communities that are receiving the immigrants. Perhaps I think that one of the basic mistakes of our world today is that people don't read enough or don't have access to all this artistic representation so much, because that is a way of putting ourselves in these other places, and could be a way of perhaps changing a lot of racist attitudes and a lot of stereotyped versions that we have of these transnational subjects. Yeah, but mainly there is much more work done on the side of the others.
Thank you, Silvia, for your brilliant talk. Well, how can we cope with the fact that many people of migrant origin have voted for Brexit in the UK or Donald Trump in the US? I think this idea of the bridge, which is beautiful, which I completely embrace, but you know, the world seems to be quite in a different direction in many ways. How can we cope with that?
I cannot cope yet. I think we are still in shock, no? Assimilating what has happened. But then that would go to many of the challenges, no? That perhaps we need also these people to identify with the narratives that we are offering to them, and really create bridges that transcend the art form and go to the reality. That perhaps, as I said, sometimes we have quite of an idealistic or too optimistic version, we critics, but then from the artwork we have to go to the society, and not only perhaps you see an exhibition, you watch a documentary like this, and then you are moved in your house, you cry, and that's all. So I think we have to transcend, no, from the work art to a more activist position, I could say. And I think this is also one of the objectives of your master, no? The projections of the social outreach of all this, no? How to then reach and engage with the community. Perhaps what is failing is that. No?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your nice talk. These works you have commented on, because of the knowledge they convey, they are huge instruments of political power. Were they known by a wider audience, especially the typical white middle-class audience in Western countries. But I have the impression that they are not very well known outside the academic environment. Which do you think are the steps that should be taken, if any, in order for these works to reach a wider audience?
Or perhaps carry out more dissemination activities, or to engage, to prepare workshops or more activities with the civic society, no? With the people there, to promote the reading of these books, I think. Yeah, because as you said, it's mainly academics or people who are really into this kind of studies, that some of them become more mainstream, like say the Smiths, for instance, but others are not so popular. But I think we should promote them in different ways, with workshops, through the radio, through the media, in the way that is possible for us. Also teaching, I think, is a way of changing things to some extent, introducing these works in our syllabus, then more people will read them, they will tell their friends to read them. At least this is the hope I have as a teacher, that I can contribute to changing something.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really nice. My comment follows a little bit Antonio Sandidag's remarks. I was thinking throughout your presentation about something that I did not actually want to say, because it would sound a little bit alarming, maybe. But the thing is that all these metaphors and symbols and all these ideas have been worked through from the mid-90s up to now. Transnational, transcultural, bridges, borders, crossing borders, crossing identity constructs, blurring identity constructs. But the thing is that what we're living now and what is coming, unfortunately, I think, well, we don't know, but the thing is that literary critics and artists should somehow have an intuition or feeling of what's happening and what's going to happen. It seems that there's going to be a reverse on this, and it seems that we should be starting talking and thinking and writing about precisely what the matter, the material, and the reality, not so much blurring limits, but what limits are, and in a material and realistic way. This is just an idea that is coming to me from a couple of years ago that I came into this new field of thought called new materialisms, in which feminism is writing a lot in relation to science and the thinking of elements such as space in its reality, limits in its reality, body in its reality. I mean, what I'm saying is that all these theories are great. In fact, I've been feeding from them and writing about them for a long time. But I don't know if maybe we should start a little bit as intellectuals and also as artists, some of us or the artists, thinking about not so much the abstraction of it, but how to get to practice, into practice, and you know, the not so much conceptualization, but what is actually happened at realistic or materialistic or physical way. It's just an idea on an intellectual level. I mean,
it's great what you're saying, and it's completely true. No, that perhaps we can see a failure of many of these attempts, to. Failure. We are going to a backlash. I think
not a failure. It has been absolutely amazing, but maybe a little bit of development in the intellectual perspective. It's happening right now, and it will be happening in the future.
Well, a new era, I think it's coming also for us as intellectuals, and we will have to rethink the tools we use to see all these phenomena of borders and frontiers. So yes, it's in our hands to develop this. And yes, I think new materialism, also the eco-criticism can give us perhaps new tools to reorient this. Bridging that we have said is not bridging enough, as we have seen in the States or in Europe too.
Thank you, Dr. Pellicer, for your interesting talk. I think that what you were talking before and what Dr. Cerezo stressed on, writing as a way of therapy, I think that there's also this issue that it's also therapeutical for many of the recipients of the works as a way of not feeling isolated, because I think that one of the biggest problems when you feel alienated is isolation, and how to find a lifeline out of that isolation, and in these dark times that we seem to be facing in the immediate future, I think that sending those lifelines through literature is also a very powerful tool. I don't know if you agree with it.
I completely agree. As I said, we can see this healing that can happen at different levels, not only for the writer, but for the community, as you said, that may feel identified with what they are reading or what they are seeing there, and also for a bigger audience, that perhaps they are not part of that community, but they are able to empathize with that kind of suffering. But for instance, in some of these autobiographies by Jewish women, they said that reading other women like them was so helpful for them to assimilate the traumas of the parents as survivors of the Holocaust, for instance, that they really felt as part of a group while reading or attending meetings with people that had gone through the same experience, no? So completely. And in that case, we can find this literature as a way of linking people too, no? So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk, and I'm pleased to thank you also for your work. The last course in which you were my teacher, I'm very pleased to meet you in person. And I would like to ask you, where do you place the topic of violence inside all this question related to the verbalization of minorities? I studied the story of the black army soldiers coming back from the First World War, and they were rejected by their own people, by their own country. So they faced a historical moment in which white people organized to kill black people, and the moment in which they stopped of doing it was the moment in which black people organized to defend themselves. So in all this process you talked about in your beautiful talk, where is the point in which some minorities have to realize that they have to fight for their rights? It's not enough talk about it or even writing a novel. You have to go to the streets and fight for what do you think is your right to be happy, like the American Declaration of Independence say.
Well, as you said, for many of these artists or writers, they use art instead of violence as a kind of as their mechanism, no, to claim for the rights. But as you said, sometimes it's not enough, no. But most of them, first, their relation to violence has been as victims. So you find many of these narratives as a way of going through, working through the being victims of this violence. But the narratives I've been dealing with, at least, they don't see themselves still as so much active agents of violence acts, no? Because, for instance, the Mujeres de la Caucus Chicana, they demonstrated in the streets, so in that sense, yes. But it always is more like claim for the rights without this extreme violence that some of them suffered. No? But yeah, violence is constant in many of the writings and of these films, and yeah, many of them have been victims in an active or indirectly or directly, of acts of violence.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. It has made me think a lot about many things. And of course, as Marta has said, we have to pay attention to these people around us, especially because I think that's my case and many other people's cases. Thanks to these people also, we have been able to study and attend the public school and the public university, and that doesn't happen just because you want it. I mean, some people have to make efforts, and very often we don't notice it. More particularly on the issue of feminism, I am interested in knowing what has been the male response, because my suspicion and my opinion is that, and I'm not the only one who thinks that, being also a man is good for you to understand, to embrace these ideas. We do not always know how to do it, but at least there is an interest in many people. So I'm interested in knowing how the response has been from male readers, writers, scholars, and that's it.
Well, the thing in general with transnational feminism has been also criticized because saying that in the end many of the activism that it wanted to achieve, all the fighting for human rights, as we were saying, has not been as successful as it was expected. No, this idea that linking people, linking women from different places of the world, this third space, was going to be more productive than in the end it has been. So it's been criticized to some extent because of that. But from the male perspective, well, I see that more and more men are becoming engaged in all kinds of feminist movements. I think that nowadays it's not only a female part of your life, or a female way of thinking, or a female way of being in the world. For instance, in our faculty, in the Faculty of Education in Zaragoza, to give you a local example, there is we organize some activities about education and equality, and we have a lot of men involved, and there is an association of men fighting for an education in equal terms, and the relationship between them and us, if you want to put it that way, is completely. There is no discrimination against the man because he's in a feminist group or something like this. So I think things are evolving in a positive way in that sense.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very, very much for your very informative and wonderful presentation. Well, you've given us so many ideas that we have, food for thought, which is wonderful. While I was listening to you, more and more ideas came into my mind. I was thinking about Doris Lessing's statement when she, in Martha Quest, in the Martha Quest series, when she was talking of that fatal chain of repetition in women's lives. And while I was listening to you, I kept thinking that of the concept between local and global, and feeling that the women's questions, if we can call it like that, is such a global phenomenon, and it has particular specificities, if you like, locally, but it's a global phenomenon. I think that I would like to deconstruct that awful bad conscience between, in Europe, we always feel that we Europeans, have to be deconstructed because we are the ones that accept minorities and we are the bad ones. We are, in the film where we represent that role. And I think it's so universal because I think patriarchy is the most universal of phenomena. So it happens all over the world, which is terrible because, we are always sort of changing here and there, and migrant women go here and there all over the world. Of late, I've been doing research on women in Islamic cultures. And you have dreadful examples of that, that belong in that terrible change of repetition, which means that most women suffer on sexual terms and they are reduced to domestic work. That is, those two are their only options. Sexuality, selling their bodies, or being directly abused, and domestic work. And in those cases, and in the second case particularly, I think that women co-opt patriarchy too. And we never denounced that. And I was really, when you showed us the example of that woman who was saying that being women means being feminist, well, I quite disagree. I think the Trump election shows that in a very striking way. I think that many women co-opt directly patriarchy, and Trump's wife is a perfect example, and all women that follow them. And then I was thinking about also what has come out here about what we can do. And I think that I liked very much when you were talking about the therapeutical effect of writing. And I would like also to outline the witnessing effect of writing. As I told you, I've been reading a lot about women who dare raise their voices in Islamic cultures. Of course, most of them are exiled, because they couldn't stay there after writing, or they could only write about their experiences when they were out of those countries. Talking of memory, my memory fails me all the time now, and so I've become so really hooked to ebooks. And while I was, while we were here engaged in dialogue, I was looking up titles, and I have so many titles of women talking about their experiences in these countries, which we tend to forget because they are so far away, because we give for granted that their culture is special, that their civilization is special. And then I think that from the feminist point of view, we have this respect for experiences which are not ours, and we dare not raise our voices on behalf of other women, because sort of we are regarded as paternalistic or oppressive in a sense, and you know very well this dialogue and this problem within feminist studies. And well, just to give an example, I have lots of titles I could tell you in a minute, but that's silly because then you will forget them in 5 minutes. But I would like just to bring to your attention Alice Walker's beautiful book, In Possession of the Secret of Joy. When she went to Africa, that's the result of a trip she made to Africa to really investigate about women's circumcision. And she was rejected by women there, by African women who felt that she was black, of course, she was African American, but she was not African. And so she could not speak for African women, which is incredible. And then she could not denounce that because it was not her culture. It was a different culture. And then she was not given voice. And she was rejected. She had to leave the country.
Yeah.
And then she...
I think that's why perhaps many of them stay on writing what we said before, that many of these books do not reach such a wider audience, because in the end they don't belong to one place, not to the other. They cannot become activists in their place of origin. So in the end, what they can do is this: write fiction, write.
So, well, I think this is a comment that has been raised by your presentation, and well, ideas, and the subject is so complex and and so wonderful that I really invite you to work, because I was thinking also of the concept of minorities, according to Deleuze, in which he said in 1,000 Plateaux, Deleuze and Guattari, that women were a minority, not because of their numbers, because they are, there is a larger number of women in the world, but because of their social position, their lack of power. So they would always be a minority, regardless of their numbers. So this gives us so many ideas to open up paths for research. So I wanted to thank you very, very much for...
Yes. I know I wanted to show that, like all different areas of friction that come alive in many of these artworks.
Yeah, and I think that nowadays that Islamic culture is achieving, it's an axis of, is the opposite axis to European or Western values. And I think there's such a world there that we dare not walk, that and that is really worthwhile examining. So, and thank you very much. And if you want to comment anything, because I really didn't want to monopolize
the dialogue. Titles you were thinking of.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But also this idea of Deleuze and Guattari, the minority, it came to my mind when I read Michel Wonder's comment on the language as the center and the margins. Also this idea of deterritorialization. How can language, as when you are an immigrant or you are not a native of that community, can help you to territorialize yourself, but simultaneously to make you feel deterritorialized, that you are not really part of that community. And many of these writers, they write in English, although this is not their or mother tongue or the tongue of their ancestors. So also is that double side of language, no? That they are using the we can say the colonizing tool, for instance, of the hegemonic tool, to have a voice. So that you also have a lot of controversies there, no? They are using English to make themselves heard, you know, but yeah, this is the never-ending dialogue with these minority communities, I think.
There's a book I would like just to mention, which is called Crossing the Gulf, Love and Family in Migrant Lives. And it deals with migrants, women migrants from the Philippines, for instance, who go to the Gulf, to the Emirates, because of the enormous work possibilities there, and because they are rich countries, and they expect to have a better life, and they're just treated there as slaves by women too, and as sexual slaves and as domestic slaves, absolutely. And then there's no legislation about that, so they are absolutely, I mean, without any defense, any possible defense. So they depend absolutely on their employers, and they have no one to recur to when there is a problem. And it's really worthwhile reading it, because it shows this migrant experience of women all around the world, Yeah. So it's
what you said at the beginning. It's a global.
Yeah, the globalization, the global. Yeah. Of female slavery.
Yeah.
Sexual and domestic.
Thank you, Angeles. This is a wonderful way to round off this session. Thank you again, Silvia. We can just talk over coffee. So thank you, everybody.